Hi everyone, welcome to FrankensteinsFabrics Mystery Block. This month, for the month of April, we have our rail fence block. Now if you do Google rail fence, you will find that there are a couple of variations on it, but generally it is either 3 or 4 strips. So depending on which way you want to go this time round, I'm doing 3 strips, but if you want to do 4, we have to readjust your calculations to fit our 12-inch square. So before we get started, I just want to have a quick word to you about starch. Now at the beginning I talked to you about using Mary Ellen's Best Press. Now it is the one I do recommend. However, I have had a little bit of feedback because Mary Ellen's is on the more expensive side for starch. It's about $17–18 a bottle, and refills are about double that. If you don't want to spend too much money on starch, and you're okay with using a propellant one, so a spray can as opposed to a water-based one like Mary Ellen's is, one of the ones I do recommend, now I haven't checked this because I'm assuming it's still in the supermarket, but Crisp. I've used this for years. One of the very first big applique projects I started, I used Crisp. It is completely fine to use, but it is a spray one, and it will leave residue on your fabrics. So I've starched my fabrics for today's thing, and on the black you can see these little white marks. That's the Crisp. That's the only thing that you will find, but it does wash out, so don't be afraid of the marks. Just be aware that that does happen if you come across using something like that. Now there's a whole bunch of things on the back of the can about cautions and warnings and first aid and things like that. So the other thing I will say to you, one of the first times I did use this, I was ironing in my hallway at my old house in Beecroft. We had slate tile floors, and I was spraying on the ironing board. I was doing all my blocks, and the residue from the Crisp settled on the slate floor, made it slippery. So if you are using this, carpet is best, outside, somewhere where it won't settle on a slippery surface like tiles or lino or something like that. So just be careful with that one. We don't want anybody falling over. So with our rail fence block today, I'm using 3 fabrics, and I'm going to be using plains. The reason for this is because we are making 12 blocks. We don't want everything to have a print in it. So I will mix and match a few plain blocks and print blocks and things like that over the course of the year. So this is the first one that will be completely plain. Now, totally up to you what fabrics you use. I've just chosen this one because of the colors that I wanted to use. And the other thing I will warn you, if you decide to make a quilt with this block and use lots of this block, please be aware that rotation of rail fence and color choice of rail fence can sometimes lead to an accidental symbol being created. It can look like a swastika, so just be careful of that one. I have seen, like, a lot of people like to make this block in red, black and white, and it does come across with an accidental, it's like a secondary pattern that it produces. So just be advised of that with the rotation of your blocks. I am going to be using my light, dark orange and my black today, mainly because my fabrics are all Halloween. I want this block to kind of look a bit candy corn, but not with the yellow and the white. So I will swing the camera around and we will get started. Okay, so today's block is really quite straightforward with our fabric cutting. You just need to iron and starch all your fabric choices. So if you're picking 3 fabrics, or if you're picking 4, if you pick 3, we're cutting them at 2.5 inches. So that's what I'm about to cut now. So we want 1 strip of each color. So make sure your fabric has a straight edge, whether you need to realign it and cut it again. We have our fold is the closest edge to me, and I'm putting it on a solid line. Fingers in the center, one straight cut. Now with all of your fabrics that have been starched, if you need to make a note of that in your pile of fabrics, you can. Otherwise you can always restarch, or just starch everything in one go so you're ready to go for each section. So now this is my darker orange. It needs to be straightened up, so I'm just finding the smallest measurement I can so I'm not wasting fabric. It's always handy to keep your bin underneath your cutting table. Fingers in the middle, light pressure. Now, if you're working on your blocks and you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. My details will be in the description box below, so there'll be my email and my phone number. So if you have questions about what to do with these blocks, or something's not working for you, please let me know. Now I'm not using any of the markings on my mat, I'm just using my ruler. The mat is there if I need markings that are bigger than what I'm doing, but currently I don't need them. Okay, so we now have our 3 strips cut. Now, generally when I'm joining strips like this, I don't worry too much about the selvage edge, because I'm going to be cross-cutting these strips later on after they're joined. So now I just need to decide which direction I want them in. Do I want them like that? Do I want the orange to be my focus and in the center? Or do I want the light one in the middle? So I think I want them, I actually think I want the black in the middle. So I'm going to join my strips, so I'm joining them to each other down the long length, and then I will press the seams and come back to the cross cutting for you. Okay, so I'm just going to show you this bit because I had a thought about our seams. So Scant 1/4 inch seam. Now on my machine I have my 1/4 inch foot. Now my 1/4 inch foot, I have a Janome, it has a little metal guide on it. So what I want to do is, that is right on the edge here, but my needle position, I've actually moved it over from its normal 3.5 position to my 4.7. And if you can, I don't know how well you can see that, but there's a little bit of wiggle room in terms of the needle position for the hole on the foot where it can go. So I've just made it slightly scant. I can probably go another notch. That's as far as I want to take it, because otherwise the needle is going to hit the foot. So what I'm doing here is I'm just lining them up. You can pin these if you like. I'm not a pinner, as we all know. And so I'm just going to join this. Now I've got black thread top and bottom. I'm using an Aurifil black, and I am just going to go straight down the seam, the side seam here. Now one thing you will notice with fabrics that have been starched with crisp is that they sometimes make a funny noise, and that's just the starch, the needle going through the starch. If you're using Mary Ellen's Best Press, you won't hear that because it's a water-based starch and it doesn't leave too much residue within the fibre, like it doesn't make it as dense. If you want to be environmentally friendly though, Mary Ellen's is the better way to go. Crisp is, it's an aerosol can. We know what they're like. So we're not going to need all of this length that we're making. like with a couple of the other blocks, we're going to have leftovers. So now I have spoken about this before in other videos. I'm not sure if I've spoken about it in this series, is that plain fabrics will sometimes be different lengths from selvage to selvage. If you're doing any specific calculations when you're buying your plain fabrics, just take that into consideration. You can see here that the black is far shorter than my orange, and that's probably just because I've bought them from 2 different shops or 2 different distributors, and they've started with a smaller base fabric than the others. But that is a big difference, like that's a full inch there. So if you're doing calculations, make sure that you've got it correct. And that is why I also start from one end. So I always start from the same end, and that way I know that my selvages are I've got one edge that is definitely straight and even. Now, when you're sewing long lengths like this, don't pull your fabric. Try and be as light-handed as you can. And the reason being is you don't want to stretch them, because you are working with a very long length, so there's going to be stretch in that cut. So if you've pinned it, you'll be fine. And if you're like me and you don't pin, you just have to reposition every time. Now this pale orange is about the same length as the black one, so they must have come from the same person. Okay, so there we have what they call a strata. And so now I'm just going to go and press all the seams into the black because it's my darkest fabric, and then we will go to cutting. Okay, so here we have our ironing board, and we are ready to press the seams into the center. Now, as I have discussed before, do not stretch your seams. You can press them and set them, as we have spoken about before, and then you can press them into the center. Now, I just use my forefinger and my thumb, and I just push them down slightly so that I can press them in without stretching the fabric. Turn it over and check the front, that it's not rolled or anything like that, and then just press from the front as well. So do that the whole way along. Do it the same for the other side, but everything pressed into the black. So it's all nice and flat, and we're ready to go. Now you can see there, that shininess is the crisp, but it will wash out, so do not panic. Just don't hold the iron on there for too long because you may burn it. Okay, so you just check your block. It will be about 6.5. If you've lost a little bit in a curve of a fabric or in your seam allowance, we can fudge that a little bit later, so don't panic if you're a fraction off. I'm about 1/8 of an inch, 1/16. I'm not going to panic. So I've changed rulers to my 6.5 inch by 12.5 inch ruler, a 12-inch ruler, sorry, because I'm only going to be cutting across this way. So I find myself a straight line, and I'm going to cut my selvages off first. So I'm just checking my selvages, because when you have fabric manufactured, it gets pinned to a machine, and that's what the little holes in the selvage are. So you don't want to catch any of those holes in your work, because they will show on the front of your quilt or whatever you're working on. So just be careful of those holes. So I'm just going to find the best spot and take that off. Now I'm right-handed, so if you're left-handed, you can keep cutting this way. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to turn my fabric round, put the straight edge on my fresh cut edge, and because this ruler is 6.5, it's exactly what I want. And I'm going to cut 4 blocks. And as I said before, there will be some left over, and we will be keeping that till the end. Okay, so I now have this little bit left over that can go into my box with the rest of the fabrics. And I have my 4 squares here that I'm now going to rotate as my rail fence. And then I'm going to sew them together. Now, as you can see here, this is what I was talking about earlier with that potential secondary pattern, this shape here. So if you then have the next rotation moving along, if you're doing a whole quilt like this, you can get that secondary pattern. So if you're clever with your color choice and steer clear of the reds and the blacks and the whites together, you will avoid accidentally creating a swastika on a quilt. The other way you can do this as well is by creating your more L shapes. So if you don't want to have that that rotating shape, you can create the L shapes, which will sort of top and tail themselves across the quilt. So you can see here, this one's facing the right way, and then this one's upside down, and then you have the orange L's doing the opposite, going vertically. So I think I'm going to probably put my dark orange in the center, mainly because I prefer the dark orange, and I'm going to join my blocks together. So you join them in pairs, press the seams one to one way and one to the other, and then we join the seam in the middle. Okay, so we're here back at the machine again. So we're just going to do the 2 joining seams before we head to the iron. So if you're concerned about getting your blocks in the right position, just pop them, if you have an extension table like this, or just on the table beside you, so you can see what your placement is. So I'm just going to flip my right side one over and stitch it first. And I apologize if you can hear that rustling noise in the background, because my cat is trying to break into my craft room. So just do the seam, check your next one and flip it over. Now this is called chain piecing, where you join like this. It's just a bit more efficient way of sewing, saves on thread. Okay, so we have our 2 blocks here. So all I'm going to do is set the seam for both. Now if you are using orange and red fabrics, you may find that they change colour like this with the iron. That's completely normal, don't worry. So I'm going to press the seam towards the strip of fabric that is the long cut. That way I don't try and bulk up my seam on top of these cross seams here. So I have my 2 blocks now. I've got one seam going one way and one seam going the other, and I'm going to abut the seam there. Now this is pretty much the only time I will pop a pin in something, because I don't want that to move. So if you pop the pin right on the seam, you'll keep that in position there. And now we sew down this edge and we're ready for the next step. Okay, so here we are ready to sew our final seam. Now what you want to do is, because you've got seams underneath, you want to make sure that they don't flip over, because the body of your machine can sometimes flip them if they're going in the opposite direction. So just keep your finger on them to slowly stitch forward and stop them flipping over. And then when you get to the one in the middle, take the pin out and pop your fingernail on that seam where there's one flipped this way and one flipped this way, and just slowly stitch over it. Realign everything if you need to. Now I am getting a little bit of fraying going on here, so I'm probably going to lose a few threads. Okay, so yeah, there's a bit of fraying happening here. So I'm just going to go to the iron and press the seam, and the block is done. Okay, so here we have our block. Just going to set the seam, and then I'm going to iron it to one side. It doesn't matter which, because you'll have seams going in both directions. And at this stage here, if you want to, you can put some more starch on your block before you pop it away. Always pop the lid back on anything that needs a lid, and then just starch it and press it, and it'll all be good. And at this stage, you're ready to square up your block, pop its label on, and put it into storage for our next step. Okay, so here we have our block already nice and bright in the sunshine here. Now I have lost a little bit of my measurements due to some fraying. I'm not too concerned, because when we get to joining our quilt blocks together, I will show you how to disguise if anything's a little bit off. Now if you've got things that are a ½ inch off or something else has gone wrong. So if anything like that happens to you, please feel free to get in touch and we can talk through it. But at this stage, this block is done. So, rail fence block, please be aware of your colour choices. And it's ready to go into storage. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll see you next month for May's mystery block. Bye for now.